We want severe limits on population growth to reverse the damage the Liberals did to our system. The population has been growing out of control. Our borders have been left wide open.
What up, beautiful people? Well, there are some interesting things happening in terms of high-level stories happening in this country, one of which being the GC Strategies findings, the findings on how corrupt the Liberal government has been over the past at least 5 years, likely more, on how they applied in terms of giving contracts to other consultancies, applying for contracts from the Liberal government, and that was ugly. But there are some underlying stories that we're going to cover today. Obviously, those are the high level, and a lot of people are talking about those, and those were, well, egregious. But we're going to talk about the things that are happening kind of underneath. And one of them being, it was kind of talked about at the end of a press conference a couple days ago by Pierre Poilievre, saying, yeah, we need to figure out this immigration situation. He even went even harder on the idea of immigration than he did previously before the election and then during the election. He said, we need to have some real talks and some real ideas around immigration and bringing this stuff down. That was fascinating. And then number two, we discovered the finance minister going over the old Bilderberg meetings, and we'll be discussing what that's all about. And then number three, well, 63% of Canadians do not want to be a part of Trump's Golden Dome. However, we're finding out through sources that Mark Carney will be joining Donald Trump's Golden Dome, and people can do one thing and one thing only, and that's absolutely suck it. This is the LA Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. I'm grateful to have you on one more time. If you get any value from the show, you find anything interesting that you learned today that you don't get in the mainstream media, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. It helps to grow the show, helps us to get to new audiences, and helps bring a new perspective to politics in this country. Now let's get into our first story, shall we? So Pierre Poilievre did a 10-minute presser during question period a couple days ago, which got the ire of many, including conservatives, saying, what are you doing? But we won't get into that. We'll get into kind of what he talked about in this press conference, which was a lot of the GC strategy stuff and the things that were discovered and what ended up coming of the 7-year ban. And then as well as he kind of just slips in the problem with immigration in this country at the end, and then toodles, bounces. And so this was kind of fascinating. Let's watch this.
Think of the border security bill that was tabled last week, Bill C2. You haven't offered your views on it. Can you give us?
Well, we support a stronger border. We want severe limits on population growth to reverse the damage the Liberals did to our system. The population has been growing out of control. Our borders have been left wide open. This has caused the free flow of drugs, human trafficking, illegal migration, and much worse. And that is why we want a stronger border. We want to crack down on abuses in the immigration system. And we want to ensure that any frauds in the refugee system are reversed. Those are the things we're looking at. But we're also going to study the bill carefully to make sure that long-standing Canadians who are following the law are not having their rights and freedoms violated. Thank you.
So as that toodles bounced real quick because, well, that is especially in Ottawa to the press corps, that is some inflammatory rhetoric. But that is true. We had in the first quarter over 800,000 people come here, which is over double than what we usually get in a year before our immigration system went out of control back in 2021. So think about it. Over double what we usually get in a year before this insanity started. That's what was happening. And so he was talking about, obviously, the legal migration. We talked about the drugs across the border. We talked about fraudulent claims for immigration or asylum seeking. He talked about all of that. But the reality is what the reality is. Because people have the conversation, well, it's like we have a healthcare problem, which we can't have more people leading to those services being swamped. We have a housing issue. We can't keep up right now. So why are we bringing in more people? And there's just crisis after crisis after crisis right now. We don't have enough jobs. Food's way too expensive. People can't afford proper food. There's just a lot of problems happening in our country, as you well know. And bringing in more people to compete for already scarce resources creates a serious problem. That's the reality. You bringing in all these people drives down wages. You bringing in all these people drives down the quality of life. You bring in all these people drives down what we currently know. And you can call that selfish. You can call that stupid. You can call that a bigot. You can call that whatever you want. The reality is what the reality is. Until you're impacted by this, you can continue living in a cocoon over it. But the reality is what the reality is. This is hurting regular people. It's not only hurting the Canadians who've been here in terms of getting a job and making a way of life for themselves. It's also hurting the immigrants that are coming over who have been promised one thing and handed another. That is not okay. And it's nice to see Pierre Poilievre come out a little harder on this. However, I admit it's getting to a point where things are getting so crazy that the Conservatives are probably going to have to go even harder on this. Not worry about being called a bigot, not worried about being called a racist, not worried about being called whatever the people on the left side want to call them. Because the argument is you got to come on the other side. People can't afford their homes. People can't afford their food. People can't access healthcare. All of our systems are swamped right now. Why are we bringing in more people to continue swamping it? You don't even have to get into the societal issues. Just get into what it's doing to our systems in this country and how it's hurting everybody. And we won't even get into the temporary foreign worker issue, which is a whole separate problem that I'm happy Jamil Javani's been tackling as well. Because the more this keeps up and the more people they bring in is going to lead to a societal collapse. And I know, well, I'll let you speculate where the reasoning for that. However, we'll leave it at the facts. Societal collapse is upon us if this continues. The society we knew, the Canada we knew, will no longer exist. It will just be a country full of people with no national identity, with a diminished way of life, making far fewer dollars than they ever have before now. We are already seeing, we've seen the stats, we've seen the polls, we've seen the research, that we are already witnessing a decline in quality of life in terms of the future generations are actually going to be worse off than their predecessors gave to them. That is where we're at. So it's nice to see Poilievre standing up in the pulpit and saying, this needs to stop immediately, and this needs to be checked now. But they're probably going to have to go harder on this because this is going to become a very serious issue very quickly if it's not focused on. Because the reality is Mark Carney's still in early days. Mark Carney's still in delicate days. As well as the Conservative Party, kind of every party is in delicate days right now. However, that's going to be the job of the Conservative Party, is to highlight this, highlight the pain people might be feeling from this, show them that there is somebody in Ottawa who sees it, and then allowing the people to see it, being able to connect their emotions to what they're seeing and calling on this current government to do something about it, not just placate with words saying, we're going to keep it under 5% or 2% or 5%, whatever the number was, and finding out 5% of our population is insanity in terms of the people we're trying to bring in. So anyways, that was fascinating. What was also fascinating is, the old Bilderberg conference, which has been going on since 1954, which is essentially just an elite conference, which you have the businessmen and business women and political elites that go to this conference every year to talk about prestigious ideas, things that are going on in the world, to talk about capitalism in the West. And it's traditionally been a conference to connect business people in Europe and in North America, as well as the political elites, to share ideas of what to do. The last time Canada sent someone over to the Bilderberg conference would have been 2017 with Bill Morneau, the finance minister to them. And so there's only been like a sprinkling of people, whether on the provincial level or on the federal level, who've gone to this over the past 25 years. It's a very elite conference. Only so many people can join. And so it's fairly fascinating that as soon as Mark Carney gets in, his finance ministers all of a sudden got an invite to go to the very prestigious and exclusive Bilderberg conference. And the Conservatives brought this up in the House of Commons, and it was funny seeing Mr. François-Philippe Champagne try to not address it and filibuster the heck out of it.
Minister of Finance going to be using taxpayer dollars to travel out of the country this week?
Yeah. First of all, I'm happy to say hello to my colleague. He was my critic when I was a young man, Mr. Speaker, when I started in this House, and now I see that 10 years after, I still have the pleasure to have to answer his question. He comes from a great region. My dad lives next to his.
Niagara West.
Is the Minister of Financing planning on traveling to the Bilderberg meetings this week using taxpayer dollars?
The Honourable Minister.
I'm very proud to answer questions from my colleague. Like I said, he comes from a great region where my family is also, so I've seen him in action, and it's great to see that they can.
For Niagara West.
I just want to ask the Finance Minister why he believes that he should spend time at the Bilderberg meetings rather than actually tabling the budget.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad to see my colleague is actually following paying so much attention about what I do. I travel to Shawinigan also every weekend, Mr. Speaker, and I would be glad to invite him at home as well because he seems to be very interested where I'm going.
That was that. It was kind of frustrating to watch. Depends what type of mood you're in when you see that. There's some that when I first saw it, I kind of laughed. I was like, yep, that's politics for you. Just filibuster the crap out of it. And there's other times if you're just frustrated with where politics are at in general, you just want to punch a TV screen. It just depends on where you're at mentally. And this is just kind of frustrating because you want to know why you're going to the Bilderberg meetings and why are you doing this instead of working on the budget that you're promising coming in the fall. You're the finance minister. You promised that there would be no budget coming, and then your boss said, no, there would be a budget coming. You said, oh, okay, then you kind of flubbered and withered in the wind. But just to sit there and filibuster like crazy, and I understand why I did it, because you have to look at in the wake of what happened with the public safety minister, what happened in the wake of the immigration minister, where these two ministers were made to look like fools in the House of Commons, answering questions and not knowing the answers to those questions. And well, clearly Philippe Francois Champagne didn't have answers either, so he decided to filibuster instead and not wither in the wind like his two previous ministers had. That's really what this play was. And Liberals, as per usual, and governments in general who are in charge will always, and I mean always, avoid any accountability and will always avoid any type of scrutiny. And this is just a very egregious version of it. And this style of Liberal Party is very, very good at it. And it's just something to highlight, keep an eye out for, and hopefully Conservatives continue to put the pressure on them to make them give some real answers. But we move forward to this story. CBC reportedly finds out that Mark Carney is in the final stages of a deal of getting Canada on board with Trump's Golden Dome. Oh, baby. Liberal supporters are going to love this one.
Canada and the U.S., they have now gotten to a point that a document outlining a potential agreement has been shared back and forth by officials in Ottawa and Washington. That is according to three sources with direct knowledge of the information who've spoken with either me or with my colleagues at Radio Canada. Now, sources are making it extremely clear a deal is not imminent and there's more work that needs to be done and that they're not expecting an agreement before the G7 summit next week. But we have learned a little bit about what's in this document. According to one source, it includes a commitment from Canada to participate in the Golden Dome missile defense strategy. That is a controversial proposal from U.S. President Donald Trump that could end up costing hundreds of billions of dollars and take years to develop. It also highlights Canada's recent commitment to it meeting its NATO defense spending targets, Canada's plan to make further security investments in the Arctic, and the previously announced measures to highlight border security. Now, Canada is pushing for tariff relief from the Americans, but what the Trump administration is willing to commit to at this point, that remains unclear. There are a wide range of tariffs imposed on Canadian goods, though there are also carve-outs and some exceptions in some cases. The biggest challenge right now is those higher tariffs just imposed on steel and aluminum. Most U.S. trading partners are now facing a 50% tariff, and that is not something that Trump appears to be backing away from anytime soon.
So there you have it. Sure, I may have spoken out of turn before that. They're not in the final stages, but the fact that there's a lot of documentation back and forth happening around this, and it's looking likely that a deal will be reached on this at some point, which is fascinating because the fact they're getting this far on this deal, and the fact that Nanos did a survey asking Canadians if they want to be a part of Donald Trump's missile Golden Dome defense system, well, the options are, the blue is Canada should pay the price to be part of the American Golden Dome missile shield for North America. And the red, which is the second option, says Canada should not be part of the Golden Dome missile shield and instead spend on the capability of Canadian armed forces. And the gray is just, I'm unsure. And so in the red, you have 63% of Canadians who don't want to be a part of this and say we should spend money on our own military. 63% have no interest in being part of Trump's Golden Dome. 17% of Canadians are interested in being a part of that Golden Dome. I'll be honest, I'm a part of that 17%. I'm actually on board with that. I think that would be fantastic. If it makes sense, then it makes dollars. You know what I'm saying? If it makes sense from a dollars perspective, then why not? Seems like an interesting idea. Seems fascinating. I'll leave it at that. But the fact that 63% of Canadians are just like, no, that's an overwhelming majority of Canadians saying, I don't want it. The fact that Mark Carney is likely going to pull the trigger on this anyways, well, that shows you just how much they care about their constituents. It is fascinating because right now we're still kind of hanging in the balance. China is about to land a deal with the U.S. They're like maybe a week or two away from landing on a final tariff deal between the two countries. And to this day, Canada still doesn't have so much as a sniff of a deal from Donald Trump. And then he was announced yesterday that the time's up and finding a deal for those who have been hanging out in the wings. And it's going to be a rude awakening. And he shared this here.
We're rocking in terms of deals. Now, at a certain point, we're just going to send letters out. And I think you understand that, saying this is the deal. You can take it or you can leave it. You don't have to use it. You don't have to shop in the United States, as I say. So at a certain point, we'll do that. We're not quite ready. We're dealing with quite a few countries, and they all want to make a deal with us, every one of them.
Who's next? Who are you expecting to get a deal with next?
So we're dealing with Japan. We're dealing with South Korea. We're dealing with a lot of them. We're dealing with about 15 countries, but as you know, we have about 150 plus, and you can't do that. So we're going to be sending letters out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, to countries, telling them what the deal is, like I did with EU.
And are you happy with the EU right now? You were unhappy with them about 10 days ago.
Well, I'll let you know in about a week. They do want to negotiate, I will say that. What does it mean?
Donald Trump saying we are sending out letters next week saying, here's the deal, take it or leave it. That's where Canada is right now. Assuming that there's been no movement. Like, movement on a deal has not been reported. Movement on a deal, even getting close to a deal, has not been reported. So we're assuming that those talks are kind of not really going anywhere. And now the next step is we're just going to be getting a letter here in Canada saying, here's a deal, take it or leave it. No negotiation, no nothing. That is what this Mark Carney government has gotten us. He's been going to every other country, putting bills forward that's sending more of our funds over to rearm Europe, which is, again, a country that's across the ocean from us instead of the country that shares a border with us on the same continent. And then now sending his finance minister over to the Bilderberg conference, which is, again, another European schmooze fest to a degree. We are getting very close to the EU these days. And Mark Carney is trying to drag Canada, kicking and screaming to the EU, while at the same time doing deals with China and getting a little too comfortable with the communist regime over there. That is where things are at, and that is the news. So anyways, just before I leave, I promised on our live stream yesterday that I would clarify what's going on with the GC Strategies. In terms of GC Strategies has been denied for 7 years to be able to apply for government contracts. And people are asking, like, okay, fair enough, but does that mean the people who owned GC Strategies are not going to be allowed to apply for government contracts? How does that all work? Can they just make another company and then apply that way? And we went through the documents. And in this case, yes, people who own GC Strategies can make another company and apply through that other company. However, it is said that when you do apply for a Government of Canada contract, you have to supply the names of everyone who works in your company. And likely when the name of Christian Firth, say, comes across the table, well, red flags are going to go up saying, whoa, do we want to actually even talk to these guys? However, we know how corrupt the governing party has been when it comes to these types of contracts. We literally learned a groundbreaking news about it yesterday. So it's actually going to be incumbent on the opposition party to keep an eye out for all the forms, people who are submitting, people who get contracts, to make sure Christian Firth gets nowhere near. So that's the reality. You're hoping that the institutions see Christian Firth's name if he applies under a different company, and they say, no, we can't give anything to you. We can't even talk to you. You're hoping that's what happens. However, my confidence isn't there that will happen. So it's actually going to be important on the opposition party to call it out and highlight it and ring those bells if that were to ever come. That's how it's going to work. That's how it is. But anyways, have yourselves a good one. I'm out.